Hey everyone, in this tutorial we're going to go back to the basics in terms of general programming concepts. So maybe you're a new programmer or computer scientist, you're in school, you're trying to learn the basics and you're struggling. My goal is to hopefully make this a little easier for you. So in this particular example, we're going to be taking a look at conditional statements. So these would be if statements, if else statements, or even if else if kind of statements. So we're just going to be looking at quite a few examples. They're not, hopefully they're not going to be too aggressive, but the more you do them, the better, obviously the better off you're going to be when it comes to your knowledge of this particular concept. So we're going to walk through a few scenarios. Again, they shouldn't be too difficult, but hopefully it'll make it easier for you to wrap your head around. So you'll notice I do have my project open. This is just a basic C++ file. That's going to be the language of choice for this particular example. I have it open in Visual Studio Code. I have Visual Studio Code configured to handle C++ development. If you need help with configuring Visual Studio Code, because maybe you're not using a different editor, I do have a previous tutorial where I demonstrated how to configure this. I recommend that you go check it out. But if you're all configured and you're comfortable in the editor that you're using, great. Let's just go with it. So in this project, what we're going to do first is we're going to add a very basic if statement. And if you're unfamiliar or you're confused around what an if statement is, it's basically a statement that determines whether or not a piece of code should execute. So let's take the following, for example. Let's say that we have a variable. It's an integer, let's say. And let's say that that integer variable is, let's say, I, and it's equal to 5. So we're declaring I, and we're setting it equal to 5. Now we're saying, you know what? I don't want to execute the next piece of code unless I is less than or equal to 5. So let's just go with that for now. So in order to do that check, we would create an if statement. So we would say if, and then we would say I less than or equal to 5, which of course I is 5 currently. So it should say that this is a true statement and it should execute. So we have our curly brackets, even though they're not technically necessary for one-line statements, but just for consistency, I'm going to include them. And I'm going to say cout, and I'm going to say less than or equal to. And I'll add an end line character, so that way it just terminates the line. And I'll save it. So if I wanted to, I'll run it. I'm just going to run it in my editor. And as far as output, it printed less than or equal to. Now let's say that I want to say that this is now 6 or 56. Let's just say 6. And I run it again. So I go run it. And it didn't print anything this time because it didn't meet the particular condition. The condition was not met because we're looking to see if it's less than or equal to 5. I can remove the equal sign. And now I'm saying, you know what? This is only true. This will only print out if I is less than 5, not less than or equal to. I can say greater than or equal to 5, and in which case this would be true because I is 6, and 6 is in fact greater than or equal to 5. Otherwise, what I could do is I could also say if I equal 5, and that would mean that, you know what, if I is exactly 5, because that's what we're comparing it against, then we can print it out. So we're just going to leave it at this for now. We're going to say we're going to leave it at I less than or equal to 5. And we're going to move our way into another if scenario. So in this case, we're saying, you know what? If it's not equal to 5, or if, you know what, this first condition is not met, what should we default to instead, if anything? We don't have to, but maybe we want to. So we can say else. So this is an else statement attached to this initial if statement. So if anything other than this criteria is true, then it'll fall into the else statement. And inside of this else statement, we can say something like cout, and we can say greater than, or some other fancy message depending on what you want to do for this example. So I can save it. I is currently 6, so this first one should fail. We'll go ahead and run it. I'll say run task. And it says greater than, so exactly as we expected. So let's go ahead and change this back to 5. We're going to run it again. And it says less than or equal to. So this criteria is true based on our else condition. Now, let's go ahead and complicate it a little more. This time around, you know what, maybe we want to check to see if a number is between a number, or maybe we want to print out a third message. Let's say that maybe we want to say, you know what, let's print out something if I is less than 5. Let's print out something if I is greater than 5, and then let's print out something if I is equal to 5. So these are now 3 different scenarios that you can't really accomplish through just an if and an else statement. So you have to change the game a little bit. So right now I is equal to 5. We have our first one. I is less than 5. So let's just go ahead and say I less than. The else statement, we're going to change that up a bit. So instead of just saying else, we're going to say else if. And we're going to say I is greater than 5. So it's going to go in the order that they appear here. So the first check is going to say, is I less than 5? In this case, it's no. It's not less than 5 because it's equal to 5. Then it's going to say, you know what? Is I greater than 5? In this case, no, it's not greater than 5 because it's equal to 5. So what we can do is we can now add an else statement. So we can say cout equal to. Now you can have as many if and then else if statements as you want inside of your code, but you're only going to have one else. So you could say if and then else if and then else if and then else if, but you can only have one else. So in this case, let's go ahead and try to run it and see what we end up with. Let's go ahead and say run. It says equal to because obviously I is equal to 5 and the first 2 conditions are not met. So let's just go ahead and change it up just once. We'll say I equal to 6. I'm going to say run task greater than. So exactly what we were trying to accomplish so far. So now let's go back to my previous statement that I had said, well, what if we want to find if a number is between 2 numbers? So maybe we want to say, well, maybe we want to see if I is greater than 3, but less than 8. But not less than 3 and not greater than 8. So let's go ahead and come up with another scenario. So I'm actually going to wipe this out, and you could always replay this video to see what we did. But we're going to start from scratch again. So what we're going to say is let's go ahead and say int I equal to 5. So we're going to go with the same scenario, but we're going to check to see if it's between. So we're going to say if I is greater than 3, and so double ampersand characters, I is less than 8. Now, if we are between those two, and they're not inclusive, we're not saying I greater than or equal to 3, or I less than or equal to 8. So basically we're saying I can only be 4, 5, 6, and 7. Anything other than those numbers, and this will not execute. So we're going to say cout, and we're going to say within range, and L. I can save it. I can go try to run it again. And it says within range. So this time let's go ahead and say 3, and we'll run it again. And in theory, nothing will happen. So nothing printed out. But we can easily say that. We can say an else. So if it's not in range, we're going to say cout, and we're going to say not within range, or we can say out of range. So we're going to say end line, and we're going to say run it again. And it printed out not within range because the condition was not met. So we're coming up with an alternative scenario. Now let's come up with another scenario. Let's say that we want to check to see if something is outside of range. So kind of like the opposite of this. This we're specifically checking to see if something is within range, but now we want to check specifically to see if something is outside of range. We can't really just say else because else it's not going to cover the scenarios that we want because our primary scenario is a between. So we can actually do some minor modifications. So let's say that to be out of range, it has to be less than or equal to 3. To be out of range on the high end of it, it has to be greater than or equal to 8. Because remember, we want to include those numbers. So it's kind of the opposite of what we just did. But we can't say and. And doesn't really make any sense in this scenario. We can't say I is less than or equal to 3 and I is greater than or equal to 8 because that's just not possible. It's never going to be that scenario. But what we can actually do is we can use an or statement, which is the pipe character, 2 pipe characters. So what we're saying is if it's outside of range, so we can just say outside of range, or we can say within range. So let's go ahead and say that we want to run it. So we're going to say run task, conditionals run. It is outside of range, but let's go ahead and bring it back into range. We'll say 5, and it should fail. And it says within range. So you'll notice how we changed the scenario just by using an or statement rather than a and statement. So this is just another way to do if conditional statements. So you just saw a few examples. Again, the trend is kind of like that. They're more or less the same no matter how many times you do them. If we wanted to, we could easily do a nested statement. So let's go ahead and say if I is outside of range, we can say also what happens if I is greater than 10. Let's just go with a scenario there. So we're going to say if I is greater than 10, we're going to say let's just go ahead and say cout greater than 10. And we're going to just save it. So you notice that we have a nested if statement here. When we run it, 5 is going to say within range. So let's go ahead and say that this is 9. We're gonna run it. Run task. Conditional run. It says outside of range, but it didn't print what was inside of here because we're not greater than 10. So let's go ahead and change this to an 11 because remember we don't have greater than or equal to 10. We just have greater than 10, so 11 would be the trigger here. We're going to say run task, and it said greater than 10, so it printed out the first if statement, and then it printed out the second cout statement. So it printed out both because we have 2 different conditions, and in this case, both of those conditions were met. So again, it's not like you're going to be using these and they're going to be drastically different every time you try to use an if statement. They're going to be more or less the same. And if I wanted to, I could have 10 more conditions in here. I could say, or I is greater than, this won't make any sense, but I could say 100. This particular example doesn't make sense because I is already greater than or equal to 8. So that would be true no matter what. But you know what? You could have multiple if or statements. You could have an and statement in there. It's up to you. Whatever makes sense. So this was just a very basic example when it came to conditional statements. So if statements, and this is valuable stuff if you're just now learning how to program and get into a computer science program.